handout for this receptors. Okay, I brought 31, and I had 5 people tell me they did not want handouts, so that should be 30, but I keep handing out 31. So, is there, huh?
Who are the 5?
Who are you?
Oh, it doesn't matter, I just want to make sure I always have enough, that's all.
Who are you?
I just have a question about how you upload things. Is it like, is it always a Word document supplemented with the PowerPoint?
Yeah.
Okay, I just want to make sure it's not individual lectures, like the way you're uploading it. Like, is there a PowerPoint that you upload for every document?
Most of the time, not every, always a handout, sometimes a PowerPoint with it.
Okay.
Any other questions? Yes.
Will you put them up before, like, a while before class or like minutes before class?
Depends. Depends on how much update, how much change I do.
Yeah. Okay.
So so that's probably it. Why are you asking?
Because like I download it and then get it into OneNote, and that takes like 5 minutes if my computer's being slow. And so, like this last lecture, I missed like the first 2 slides when you were talking because I was trying to download it and get it to how I prefer to take notes. But that's, I mean, if it's going to be uploaded even 5 minutes before class, that should be fine. But when you emailed it, my email was just super slow.
Email.
You're talking about the other one?
I was the other one, yeah.
Oh, it's like, wait,
Yeah,
that was her.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, but even if it's not uploaded,
They will always be uploaded about 10 minutes before class, at the latest. I mean, I'll load them. But I may, if I don't have any changes, I may load them 2 or 3 days ahead.
Yeah.
But, so I have no rhyme or reason. But I didn't know that, so I will do my best.
yeah.
I won't promise, but I will do my best to get them in, maybe like quarter till, you know.
Thank you.
Any other logistical or procedural questions about the first round? Comments? Okay, so let's start on page 5. So what's the FDA's role in the approval process? Well, the FDA is an agency of Health and Human Services, and they are charged with the oversight of drugs, cosmetics, foods in this country. So they are there to assure safety and efficacy. So they oversee the approval process, but they oversee ongoing processes to make sure that drugs are safe and effective. Efficacy usually doesn't come into play so much. Efficacy, I think, over time, if new drugs come out and the public and the providers move that way, then drugs drop out. But safety, if safety becomes an issue, then the FDA will pull a drug and they'll take it off the market. They have the ability to do that, or a vaccine, veterinary products. That is more likely where you will see a process that will then remove a drug from the market. Food supply, tobacco, products that emit radiation, so like your microwave, X-ray equipment. Let's see. Any company that wants to bring a drug to market has to go through a process. And I'm going to outline that just so you have an idea of where drugs come from. So drugs are really expensive. So I like the capitalism. I was brought up in capitalism, so I tend to think that it works pretty well. Drug companies make a lot of money, but they spend a lot of money. So do I like all the things how much they charge? Not always, but I have to give it to them in terms of they're private companies. They're not subsidized by the government except in some circumstances, like with the biologics or the immunizations. But the cost is overwhelming. So let's kind of look at that. So new medicines, one medicine is equal to about 2 shuttle missions. You all know shuttle missions? Okay. Sometimes I forget where you are in time and where I am in time. Yeah, so they're very expensive. So about $800 million to bring a drug to market. On average, it takes 12 to 15 years to get a drug to market. So a first grader, by the time they get out of college, a drug can come to market. So we'll go through the process and see. So this is why at one time people were like, speed it up, it takes too long. So then we shortened it, and then there were more problems, and so we kind of hopefully hit a more happy medium. Risk. 1 million compounds to get one medicine. So a lot of these products are developed through the pharmaceutical industry, but they also come through universities. College of Pharmacy where I was, we had a lot of pharmacologists that were working on new products, identifying new products, or identifying products that then a company would pick up and take further. People. So more than 50,000 people involved in drug research and development in the United States. Takes about 5,000 patients in terms of the first 3 phases of the drug to get it to market. So a lot of people in manpower time. Here is I like this slide, gives you a really nice overview. Yeah, I'm going to do something about the pointer system. So preclinical is where all the identification of products takes place. There's lots of, once they get compounds where they think they may work, they will do animal testing to figure out, is the drug, how toxic is it. They'll do early kinetic studies, how's it get absorbed, how's it work in the body. And that shows you a range of about 1 to 3 years. And then they can apply for a new drug application, okay? So the FDA will look at their initial and allow them to move forward into human testing. So this is all animal, this is human from there on. I guess I can talk about the rest of it. Then there are 3 phases. And each phase looks more and more broadly. It'll look at what dosage range tend to work. Then they'll start narrowing it down to an effective range of dosing. They'll identify side effects, and they'll identify more and more. They'll look at first normal patients, then they'll look at people who have the disease. Well, I'm going to go through these more individually as well. Once they get through those 3 phases, and you see it takes up to 10 years, then they can file another application. At that point, that's when they have all their safety and efficacy data, and the FDA will decide, yes, it can go to market, no, it needs more information, and will request them to do more studies. At that point, then it's put on the market, post-marketing, and then they'll follow that for side effects. That's why that MedWatch, which is the adverse reporting process, is very important for people to add into, because that's how we figure out that something's going wrong out in the field. Okay, let's go through these more individually. So pre-discovery phase, what I want you to take away from each of these phases is what's the goal of the phase. Okay. So laboratory, so in the College of Pharmacy, a lot of people did these kinds of studies, figuring out pieces of the pie that then, pieces of information then the drug companies would pick up and then move on. Animal studies. So this is the goal of this phase. Assess the safety and biologic activity. So they'll figure out the mechanism of action. What does it do? There's a whole industry in terms of mice that are designed just for certain studies. And they use those to figure out these things. And the formulations that work. Does it work best as a topical? Does it work best as a injectable or as a oral medicine? 5,000 compounds a year. I took these from different places. So this one says about 6.5 years. I'm not so much worried about that as that it's time consuming. Preclinical phase. We usually don't hear about these drugs at all. Phase 1. So they have filed an investigational new drug application, and they are allowed then to move into humans. So phase 1 is the first one where you get humans. Here they're done mostly in males. Now why is that? Because it comes under a lot of criticism. Yeah, men are the most, they're simple in terms of hormonal and other variations, biologic variations. So they are consistent. And so they'll usually use young, adult, normal, healthy male subjects. And what they're trying to do is to determine safety and dosage. They'll look at kinetics. So they'll give them the drug and then they'll blood sample them, figuring out how long did it take it to get in the Body, how long did it stay in the body? How much went to the kidneys? How much did the liver get rid of? Okay, so safety. These are usually open range. Everybody knows what's going on, so they know what dose people are getting, and they look and see what kind of side effects develop. They usually have a pretty good idea before they get here, so people don't get harmed in this phase. So about 5 compounds enter trials from here, out of the, I don't know if I told you, I don't know if we looked at how many, did I say how many there was? 5,000, okay. So 5 enter trial. Phase 2. Phase 2 is where you specifically look at people with the disease. Okay? So you take that kinetics that you understood in normal volunteers, now you start to put people into that with the disease. You look at how is it effective, so you have certain endpoints and markers that you want to measure. You determine pharmacodynamics, so how is that drug interacting with the body? You also establish dose response curves. So we look at concentration versus the response that we're looking for. So if we're looking for blood pressure, we're looking at, as we increase the dose, how long do we continue to see effect? Almost all drugs will exhibit this kind of dose response curve. So you have a point at which, from here to about here, where you, as you're increasing the dose, you're getting increased response. Usually at about the 50%, we'll say that's 50%. Usually you're seeing about you're getting close to maximal response. From there on, if you keep increasing the dose, there is no more response. It flattens out. Almost all drugs do this. There are a few that don't. We'll talk about those as we get through. This concept's important. One is that it establishes what's the lowest therapeutic dose and what's the max. Max means if you keep going higher, you won't get effect, but you probably get more side effects. So that's where our dosing ranges come from, is from this kind of data, from a dose response curve. I'm going to hit this again as we go through the next hour. Okay, so still small, 100 to 500 people. So that's the people with the disease. Then they broaden it out, and here's where they go into randomized controlled trials. So they put people into different arms of a study, and some of them may get 1 dose or another dose and a placebo. There'll be a control group so that you can wash out placebo effect. People will be blinded. Those who take the medicine don't know if they've got placebo or active drug or the dose, or the people who are prescribing it don't know that either. These are fairly highly regulated trials. Confirms the effectiveness in a much broader number of people. Here it's 5,000. Monitoring adverse effects, long-term use. So your first phases are fairly short. Here you're going longer because often some side effects don't show up until late. Okay? So the goal here, confirm effectiveness, monitor adverse effects, long-term use. Once they meet all these 3 phases, then they'll file a new drug application with the FDA. This process can take several years. This says 1 year, but it's usually more than that. Then when they go on the market, then they undergo post-marketing surveillance. Either they're required by the FDA to do certain follow-ups, or there is a process in place where they are watching to see reports in the field about how effective the drug is. Questions about those? Make sense? Okay. So, in the United States, this is close to correct. You see that we are about 4.2 years from the time let's see, cost of controls. Average delay in months for products after initial global launch. So we're doing pretty well in the United States compared to European countries. Now, when a drug goes on the market, they don't necessarily have that 18 years from the time they file that first application that the clock starts ticking. So they're given exclusive rights to that drug for 18 years. And so by the time most of them get on the market, they've got about 10 to 12 years left on that timeline. They're given the time to make the money back, to pay off what they spent and to garner more money in order to plow it into more research. Now, they get close to their patent being up, this grace time, they will usually come out with new dosage forms, and that will extend their patent. So that's a ploy that they use to extend the use of that drug and to make more money off of it. Let me go back to page 6. Let me talk about indications, FDA approved and off-label, because you will run into that over and over again. So when a company is filing a new drug application, and as they design their trials, they are designing it to prove that their claim is that this drug is effective for this. So in diabetes, there's a group of drugs called the GLP-1 agonists. Their initial drug application was to say that they lower blood sugar and they are effective in doing so and they're safe at the same time. So all of their trials are designed to show that and to show safety. So when the FDA approves their new drug application, they're saying, okay, you are FDA approved for these indications. You can market that your drug is effective in controlling blood sugar. That is all a company is allowed to do. They cannot legally promote that their drug can do other things. Okay? And people that speak on their behalf can only speak to those indications because that is where the evidence is. Now, it became apparent as people used these products that when you put people on them, they lost a lot of weight if they could tolerate it and stay on it. So eventually, people in the field, other providers would go, okay, maybe I'll use that for weight loss. So that is an off-label indication. You have to be careful when you get to off-label indications because if you go too far off-label, the patient has a major side effect, dies, they can take you to court. They can take you to court even if it's a labeled indication. But I would say be careful. I'm always mindful of what a drug is approved for, but as drugs are used more and more, they will amass information behind them that then says, okay, in the general community of providers, this is accepted that we can use this drug for X. We use this drug for weight loss. One of the things that curbs it usually is that insurance won't pay for off-label. So that's one of the things insurances will do, is if you try to use an expensive drug for an off-label use, they'll usually deny it. They'll just say, we won't pay for it. The patient wants to pay for it, then they can use it. But it's usually too expensive, prohibitive. Sometimes what companies will do is, and in the case of one of the GLP agonists, is that the evidence was so good for weight loss is that they went back to the FDA and said, okay, we ran these studies and here's our evidence that this drug is effective in causing weight loss. Then the FDA gives them an approval and says, okay, you have an FDA approval. Then they can go out to all the providers and say, our drug can cause weight loss and control blood sugar. The other ones don't have that indication. So they have that gives them a marketing ploy as well. But they have amassed the information that says the drug does it safely and effectively. Okay? So that's what it means by off-label. So some off-label, sometimes the companies are not going to go back to the FDA. It's expensive. And if it becomes very well accepted, they don't have to do it, it sells itself, okay? But where you get into gray is when you start really pushing the envelope and using for things maybe so off-label that either insurance will say no, or you can cause harm to a patient and then find yourself under litigation. Is that questions about that? Okay. Let me just make this statement, and I'll probably say it again and again. Always, always, drugs always have a benefit and a risk, always. We always err on any drug that is on the market, or anytime you use a drug, you're always weighing the benefits of the drug versus the risk. Okay? Every drug, everything, aspirin has risk. You can get a major bleed and have a bleeding diathesis and die. But most people have great benefit, so we accept it. Sometimes we accept great risk because the stakes are so high and the benefits are so high, like with chemotherapy. We'll undertake great harm to the patient in order to gain a great risk in terms of extending their life. So always, always have a fearsome respect for drugs because they can always do great harm as well as great good. So always, always as a provider, you always are looking at benefit to risk. What am I doing to the patient to put them at risk? Is the benefit greater than that? Okay, let's see. Okay, so drugs have lots of names. They have three in particular that you should be aware of. They have a chemical name that we usually don't worry about. If you look at investigational drugs very early in phase 1, you don't even bother to name them. It's like they may not come to life, so we're not going to give them a name. We're just going to have a chemical name. So a chemical name usually is telling you what their molecular structure looks like. We usually don't worry too much about this. If you're really in a field and you're watching what's coming out of the pipeline, you might be familiar with them because you're watching to see if they're going to make it to market. A generic name is an official name. That is given by a group. There's a group tasked with it in the United States. It's called the USAN. And they are a group, a body that sits down and they give your drug a generic name. Now the nice thing about it is that they are fairly analytical. They are not ENFTs like me. I mean ENFPs. They are STs. And they are analytical and they make things very organized. So usually in a class of drug, they will all have the same ending. So one thing I would do in your shoes is I would always look at those endings because they'll usually tell you what class the drug belongs to. Like Lisinopril, Enalapril, Monopril. All of these drugs are ACE inhibitors. So it's easy. When a drug comes out, if I don't know a drug, if I look at the generic, I can usually tell you what class it belongs to. So it's one easy way for you to start to figure out drugs and group them together. It's good to do that because usually drugs are like a group of sisters. They look different, but they all act the same or similar in the family. So pay attention to that. So this is a given name. It's a legitimate name given by a committee. A brand name is what the drug company decides to call its drug. Okay, so now these are all generic, so I have to think back. Prinavel and Zestral, two different companies. So they get to name it. And the people who name it are the marketing people. And if you watch names that come out now, they've all got the strong consonants in it. X, G, Z's, they want them strong, like Farxiga. And patients, can they say it? No, I can barely make them out. I have to go all over the internet trying to figure out how do you say your name. So anyway, that's what, it's illegal, it's proprietary, belongs to a company. Nobody owns a generic name. It's just the name that's given. The companies are stuck with it, and that's how we use them. So, example here, so here's the chemical name of this drug. Here's its generic name, it's sildenafil. Here is its brand name, Viagra. Here's its therapeutic class, it's a PDE1 inhibitor. And the lay public calls it the little blue pill.
Blue
So,
diamonds.
pardon?
Blue diamonds.
Blue diamonds, okay, there's another name. So that's how those are applied. Questions about those? So on a test, I will, unless I mess up, I will always give you a generic and a brand. Personally, I learned generics. They're never going to change. Okay? When you're out in practice, you'll know brands a lot because the drug reps are going to be knocking on your door. Are there any drug reps in this? Okay. So drug reps are going to keep it up in front of you. That's their job. But now that we've got more generics, if you deal with Medicaid, Medicare, they're going to want the generic drug. Okay? So knowing both is helpful. On a test, I will always put both of them. I don't know what the other faculty do, that's me. I think it helps. Yes, Chris?
I've been told that the generic only has to be 80% similar to the name brand, like chemically, is that true?
Oh, you're talking about bioequivalence.
Yeah.
So, what they're telling you is that it's a reference standard. So you have, if they were 100% alike, then that's perfect equivalence, right? But what the FDA is gives them a leeway, maybe 10% either side of the reference range or 20% either way. So the generics have to be similar within you can't make them perfect, but you can give them a leeway. Now, why would they do that?
Make it cheaper?
You mean the company could make it cheaper?
No, other,
sorry.
like the people who are making the generic can have similar efficacy with less cost.
No, so why should we tolerate that? Why would we tolerate that much variance?
Still effective.
Still effective. So clinically, it doesn't make any difference, okay, for the most part. Now, some patients will complain. Some drugs that are very, when I work in the anticoag clinic and we were moving from Coumadin to warfarin, and there's enough small variance because you get small variance can lead to big changes. That happens with a few drugs. With those patients, like with thyroid, we'll tell people, try to stay on the same generic brand. Because then what you're doing is you're adjusting the dose based off of a single product. Does that help? That's what they're referring to. Okay, over-the-counter products and supplements. Okay, over-the-counter, if you look on page 10, we're looking at what characterizes, that's your objective, looks at what characteristics are in over-the-counter. So I will refer to this as OTC from here on out. So these drugs are drugs that are considered safe enough that if you put it in the hands of the masses, they can safely take it without harming themselves to a great extent. Okay? So they can use the drug without supervision. Okay? So Tylenol, aspirin, antacids. Now we've got all kinds of drugs over the world. So they don't require a prescription. You can go in and buy them. You can self-medicate. You can self-regulate. They are regulated by the FDA. The FDA requires submission of a monograph. They may or may not require testing. Mostly what you're seeing now is that prescription drugs go over the counter. So that's another way that as a drug is going towards its patent time is up, then they will often take things over the counter. With good reason. Usually they find that over time there are very few bad side effects, and it is a very common problem that people could self-identify. So the last big class that's gone over the market are the intranasal steroids for allergic rhinitis, and they're going over daily. The FDA does not initiate that. That is the sponsor of the drug. So the manufacturer is also called the sponsor. So they decide to make the switch, and then they have to apply to the FDA to do that. And so then there's a different labeling. So there are specific labeling requirements that an over-the-counter the drug has to meet. Okay. So that's over-the-counter. So don't forget, as we go through different diseases, I'll say don't forget about these because patients can take them and they may not consider them drugs. So people have funny ideas about what's a drug and what's not a drug. Okay? So they may not tell you about these. They may forget. They don't take them very often, periodically, and nothing seems to happen, so they may not tell you. So when you're talking to them, you want to prompt them. Especially if you know there are other diseases, you can likely start to guess things that they might start doing or start using. Or if you're running into problems where, I don't know why you don't respond, then you need to also start digging deeper as to what else, how else they're still medicated. Yeah.
When the manufacturers like switch over and have them as over-counter drugs, do they make more money that way?
Oh, yeah, sure. Well,
Do they do that for that reason?
well, like I said, it's usually as they're getting close to the end of their it's not a patent time, what do they call it? Another word for it. When they're getting to the end of that, they will, because if the generics can come in and really undercut them, then their drug will disappear, it'll just go away. Or if they've got people that are coming in on the market that have another edge that is perceived to be beneficial, then they'll take it over the counter because then anybody can use it. They don't have to go market it to an individual doctor. They can go out and put a commercial on TV. So, yes, it's all about money. But we benefit. But they've got to stay in business. Okay, dietary supplements. So on page 10, I'm in the middle. A supplement is a product intended for ingestion that contains a dietary ingredient intended to add further nutrient value or supplement the diet. So these are often classified as food supplements, but they are not always nutritional supplements. They're not required to test new ingredients. The FDA can go in and stop them from manufacturing if harm is perceived. So here's the Dietary Supplement and Non-Prescription Drug Protection Act was in 2006. After several notable deaths that were publicized, they came back and made this act that said, okay, if you have a product that's on the market and it causes harm, you must report it. You have to report deaths, hospitalization, congenital defects, anything that's a major harm to society. They're required to use good manufacturing products. They cannot make claims, drug claims, and they have to be properly labeled. So that's where we are with supplements right now. And then they have that statement that you all have alluded to already. These statements have not been evaluated by the FDA. This product is intended to diagnose, treat, cure, and prevent disease. I wish I could say it as fast as the guy on the commercial does. Have you heard that? I don't know how they do that. Is that real or is that just mechanically?
Probably physics.
Woo, goodness. Okay, so here are some common supplements with claims.
So can they make a drug claim as long as they then put that statement at the bottom?
No, they can't. They cannot.
Sometimes they'll say like used for heart wellness or something like that.
Yes, very generic. What does that mean?
Right, okay. So they can do that with the little statement at
Yes.
the bottom, okay.
So vitamin C, cure the common cold, stop the common cold. Beta carotene, vitamin E, preventing heart disease. CoQ10 is very common, very expensive, to help people with coronary heart disease. Here are some supplements that cause adverse effects. these are before this 2006. So the young man you see that has the lay around his neck, he died of liver failure after taking Oxy Elite Pro. This is the common place where a lot of supplements will get people is in liver disease, liver failure, liver harm, hepatitis. Steve Belcher, maybe some of you remember him, he was a pitcher for the Orioles. He took ephedra, which was very common, people would take it to wake them up. It's like a Red Bull. It's very stimulating, people take it to lose weight, for energy, and because of the number of deaths that occurred, they outlawed it. He was a notable. The last woman is Dara Houston. She took DNP. Now she was in Great Britain, I believe. And remember that the drug that I told you that was banned in 1938? Well, it's still out there. She took it, she died, 23 years old. So that's the problem with supplements. I have a lot of problems with supplements. So I listen to patients. A lot of them will ask you, what do you think about me taking this? So I usually will tell them there isn't any data. I might tell them I think it would be of harm to you, especially if I'm dealing with people who are on warfarin, anticoagulants. I might tell them, here's the problem we're going to see with that. Diabetes, hypertension. So if I know of harm, I will tell them that. I usually will share with them. It doesn't have the data behind it. I wouldn't advise it. But I do not know that it'll cause you harm. How you spend your money is your decision. A lot of people have they don't believe Western medicine is forthright. They have a mistrust of medications. So they have some belief that these others have benefits that's why physicians don't count them because they either don't get paid or they're all in with big pharma. I don't know. There's lots of mistrust of an establishment always. So I listen to folks. I give them my best advice. I usually don't use them or advise them. But that's something you'll have to look at. But they just know they are unregulated as compared to you see what the drugs have to go through. Other opinions or comments? I have no problems with you disagreeing with me. May not change what I do, but that is for you. Comments? Yes?
Is it difficult to come up with treatments for patients who are on like a whole bunch of supplements because you don't necessarily know what those supplements do? Like herbal supplements, like I don't know, my grandfather takes a whole bunch of them, like they're called Quantum or something, and I don't like him doing it, but he does it. So have you ever found it to be like a huge, what's the word, effect on
Because if you're
what
trying to
you're
treat
gonna
someone, you
prescribe?
don't know what effects it can have on the drugs you're prescribing.
It's hard, it's hard. Usually we'll tell them, okay, if you're going to keep bringing it, taking it, bring it in, let it, so we at least can document the ingredients and either give you feedback or at least we know that you're taking them. A lot of it's placebo effect. Some of it is pharmacologic effect because those supplements do have effects on the body. You know, I just listen over time. A lot of times they will move away from them. Some of them are so entrenched in using them that you can't get them off of it. But my question to them always is, why do you come to see me then? It's like, what are you looking for? What do you want? So I can figure out and try to address it.
I have a question.
Yes.
So in that realm, is there anything that I know that you said that you don't like them, don't use them, don't recommend them, but is there anything, if you have a patient that is going to take a multivitamin or do something, do you have one that you prefer over the other, or like advice we could give them, or like steer them a certain direction?
Sure, I think you can do that. I think you look for the ones that have USP behind them. And more I will look at what is the ingredient in it. Like if it's a multivitamin, what exactly are we looking that you need? So yes, I'm not against multivitamins. They usually don't help if you've got somebody who's eating. Now people who are dieting or restricted, or if you've got gastric bypass people, they have to take certain vitamins. So I'm not totally against all of them, but the vast majority of people who take supplements are not, probably don't get the benefit that they're looking for. So I look for, there are some brands I might recommend, like if we're gonna do a fish oil supplement, then there are certain ones I would recommend.
Okay.
So when we get to those diseases, I'll share with you what I think. Is that what you're
Yeah,
asking about?
definitely. Yeah, just what kind of your standard of if you're gonna use one, this is it.
And it being very specific, like saw palmetto for men with BPH that won't take a drug or it's mild, that definitely has data behind it. Some of them have specific data for limited indications. Yeah.
I have a little comment on that. There's some supplement companies that only sell to healthcare providers, so physicians, nurses, dietitians, and some of them, you know, a few of them that I've seen are pretty good, and they do clinical trials behind them. They are a lot more tightly regulated than supplements that you'll just go to Walgreens and get off the counter. So there are certain companies that have a higher level of testing and quality behind them, and provide you with clinical trials and purity and everything like that.
Yeah, I'd ask for that data.
Yeah.
And look at how long they do it. A lot of them are short-lived, 6 to 8 weeks versus 5 years. So I would just ask for that data if you decide to go that way. Yes?
Where can you find information on drugs? Can you go to like an FDA website or
Oh, sure.
How do you know where they've done trials?
Oh, well, your primary literature, so reviews would be a drug class review, a review of a drug. So primary literature would give you the most of that. A lot of companies do not publish their pre-FDA approved trials anymore. Used to they did, but they've gotten more secretive in doing that. So, but that's where you would look. Now, also a textbook would summarize those. So the further you get away from primary literature, the more they will summarize. There's a lot of, like your up-to-date, a lot of your online programs that update all the time, those will give you the trials. Micromedics, very good program. So those are all annotated, so they'll give you the link back to the study by which they're summarizing the information. Does that help? Other questions? Okay. Herbal supplements, okay, so herbal supplements are probably the most problematic because they are the least regulated. One study looked at a host of supplements and found that less than half of them contained what they said they contained. Or they had ingredients that weren't on the label, or they had illegal. So it's common for like red yeast, lovastatin-like, a statin-like product to get into cholesterol-lowering meds. So they will put these products in because they boost effectiveness for the patient sees, but they're illegal. Usually the FDA will track them down and shut them down, but they'll get out long enough to have some effect over time. Okay, there's the MedWatch. It is, again, a voluntary. There's a portal for you. There's a portal for patients to report adverse effects. It's a downloadable form. You can submit it electronically. There is no, it doesn't harm you in any way. It doesn't put you in terms of at risk for litigation. But other information may be requested for you. Vaccines have a separate process by which you can report problems with the vaccine. Health literacy, a few other things I want to mention because they have a lot of effect on the way people take drugs and how they understand what you're asking them to do. So health literacy is not like reading literacy. It's the degree to which an individual has the capacity to obtain, process, understand basic health information and services needed to make health decisions. Somebody can have a PhD and have very low health literacy. So it doesn't correlate always with your education background, your ability to read, do math, any of that. Let me skip this because I'm going to hit it in another way. Health literacy is dependent on these factors: the ability to communicate, your basic knowledge, your understanding of the context of which you're in, the ability to communicate in the way that a healthcare provider understands you, and that the healthcare provider can communicate with you in a way that you understand. Has cultural overtones. It has numeracy. The ability to do basic math can greatly impact your ability to do pediatric calculations, or to take a drug and calculate the dose you need, like insulin. Most people I have found when I was working with diabetes, they can't do fractions. They can't multiply. They can't take if you're teaching them with insulin is to modify it based on their diet, they can't take the labeling on a package, figure out how much of the package they ate, how many carbs that is, and then convert that into an insulin dose. You can't do it. We did all kinds of studies on our population. I dealt with a low resource population, low education, but I'll just tell you overall math skills are poor in this state. I can't speak for others, but at least what I have come into is that it's low math skills. So their ability to adjust a dose or to modify a dose is limited. And so that can lead to underdose treatment or over-treatment. It also affects ability to get around the healthcare system. You've probably interacted with the healthcare system. It's very complicated. Just getting around a hospital, you see why they put all the red, yellow, and blue tape on the line, on the floor? They tell you follow the yellow line until you get to here. It's difficult, it's very hard. People can hardly find the parking place, so how can they find where to go in the building? So filling out forms are complex. You've probably done that by now, so it's hard. Think about people who have very low education level or have no understanding of the healthcare system. Maybe they're new to the country, maybe they've never dealt with healthcare before. It's very complicated. Their ability to give a history to a healthcare provider, to understand. For healthcare providers to use language that is understandable. You'll find this yourself. We're going to teach you in a certain way, and then when you walk in the room and you try to say it to a patient, they're like, huh? They're not, or that you can't get the information you want because you can't communicate it in a way that will get them to respond with information that makes sense. Their ability to engage in self-care, to pick up over-the-counter medicine and use it appropriately, to understand math skills, probability, the risk. So, a few years ago, the concept of plain language came out. So Winnie the Pooh says, it's more fun to talk with someone who doesn't use long, difficult words, but rather short, easy words like, what about lunch? So plain language came out, and that is just what it says. It's using language so that patients can understand what you are talking about. So it's organizing it so the most important points come first. Breaking complex into understandable, simple language, active voice. So here's an example. What do your patients think? We need a stool sample from you. Well, what if they don't use that term? We need to change your dressing. I like this one because I think about my diabetic patients. I need to draw some blood today. I can tell you from being a pharmacist for years is that I was amazed at what people would do with medicines. Mostly because it made sense to them, but it wasn't at all what we intended. Early on, I saw patients put, we used to use aminophylline suppositories for asthma. Well, doesn't it make sense to you? Why would you put something up your rectum in order to help you breathe? Does it make sense? No, so where would they put it? Up their nose.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So, You know, I gotta hand it to him, it made more sense than what we were asking. So in terms of health literacy, it is estimated that only 12% of the population has the skills to understand what you are saying to them. Now, there's all degrees of it, but the 12% has the skills to deal with the complexities of healthcare. So why I'm telling you this is because when it comes to medication, people don't take medications. They don't take them like you want them to. And if you come back and assume that they're taking it and understood how you want them to do it, they won't. You have to start with the basic premise. Most people don't understand that they're not going to do what you say for a variety of reasons. And so that has impact on when you see them back and you're trying to figure out did your treatment work or not. Low literacy is linked to poor health outcomes, less frequent use of preventative services. It's not bothering me, why am I going to do anything about it? Medication errors, higher healthcare costs. So who's most likely to have low healthcare literacy? Older adults, racial and ethnic minorities. So if they're culturally very different from the people they're seeing, that problems will arise. People with less education, people with low income levels, non-native speakers of English, people with compromised health status. They're usually so overwhelmed by all the things that people are asking them to do that they'll prioritize it how they see it, but it may not be how you prioritize it. Okay, let's take a break and we'll come back a little bit after 2 and pick up medication at dinner. Okay.
I'm pretty sure. I'm gonna try. I'm gonna ask you. Because like she or like the beginning of the year, she said like hand out. She's like sometimes
And so that's
right. PowerPoint.
this,
I mean, I think I'll just go right tonight. I don't remember this.
Whatever I wrote down is probably really important in there.
Yeah, you can use it.
I know the name, I probably threw the.
I really write down the
Anybody else?
And I don't like to memorize. It's short, basically a picture.
Yeah, I remember.
I just look for it once I get into the board, and I'm like, well, the next one.
I know that, you know, there's going to be a student that will go through those.
I keep track, we have access.
Yeah.
It's so funny to get a sample. You're smart, you're really playing it hands together.
Yeah, that's good. And Taylor on the cat is really good.
Yeah.
Or they don't understand like, because you have to hold it certain ways, so it's going in and I'm holding it, and I'm just like, it's out. And they're like, no, that's not how we use it. So, now I know how to use
Absolutely.
that numbers are.
Absolutely.
It's so funny, I how when you write
So you are defining like this.
I gotcha. Okay.
Sure, sure.
So when I need that, like, I know about my numbers and so then I need to pay more attention to the hands.
Yeah, I use that, what's in the PowerPoint?
But you said it was equal, I just.
So I'm using.
Just real
That's
quick.
why I was.
Just real quick.
I don't want to be.
Really? I haven't heard of that.
I never was like, after I talked to y'all, I never looked back.
You'd rather, and I was like, yes. They were like wanting all to teach them, and I was like,
Cook Candace? Like, you
nice
budget.
and then I was like,
But yeah. Yeah.
So,
Used to not be those.
Go to School of Rock tomorrow.
We, yeah, I don't know how people think of.
There's one time. When I gave the mom so to reduce the fever, she can't did then he called her.
Poor kid.
Yeah, she's like, really when it is.
Yeah, I mean, you really have to think about stuff like that, you know? Like, really explain all the little.
Luckily she didn't push too much because that's why she stopped.
Well, that's good.
Yeah,
So,
so
it could have been really bad.
yeah, you can like. So like from that point, I had to like unlock quickly.
It's putting you back to baseline.
And where did you used to work?
Yeah.
Because I was a pharmacist.
How did they start?
Well, you would never hire me like that.
And then, you know about the good one, right? Okay, so on the prescription, it's like,
We always have to like turn around and
you
forget
get
it.
yeah. And she's like, how do I join on this?
No, there are.
Yeah, and it should have it.
I know. I know.
Like, you just do it,
It's
then
like,
like,
you know, like the patches, like fentanyl and patches, you know? Like you have to specifically write on there, take the patch off before you put the next one on. Totally.
Has she had it done?
Like, common sense. But like, they'll just put them right on top of each other and have a whole stack of them. I know. But we, like, we all the time have to recommend, you know, things that are shorter than a full name.
yeah, they are. So every single time, you need to tell them before they leave.
Yeah, so we just pull the
Yeah, so most of the customers, they know rules, one rule,
Oh, that'll be fun too.
Just wait, call it.
Right now. Accounts have already reports, so it doesn't actually report like, you know, separate.
No, you just put it it's thicker, and then you also have
So generic and generic.
Sit down in that chair.
yeah, see, that's the one they also have for the it's just packaged in the whole bottle with label on it.
Yeah, so like, so I just worked at like a family-owned pharmacy, we did a ton of stores, you know, like, our average was like 700. It's just a little hometown pharmacy that we were really fortunate. But they talked about getting a counting machine. They are, yeah, he said he'd just rather pay, you know, us to do it, you know, than buy it.
That's why you don't know. Because something is, or a law which is like, like one time, the carbon machine cannot use the alcohol to wipe.
Don't get afraid.
It's perfect.